Coral, I like your hair.
Thank you. I tapped it all off. It is gone.
I like it. Jennifer, do you know if Kyle's going to join us?
I haven't heard from it. We're missing 3 folks. I haven't heard from any of them that they're not going to make it. Dr. Bergstrom just arrived. I haven't heard from Kyle or Carrie though.
Okay, let's wait maybe just a minute or two. The driveway into town is hard to get through. It added a good 5 minutes to get home, so.
So Kyle just joined us.
Hello.
Hey, Kyle.
Good afternoon.
Okay. So let's go ahead at 5:01 and I will call the library board meeting to order. Laura, could I have a roll call, please?
Sure. Nelson,
Here.
Shuda, Stata,
Here.
Bergstrom,
Here.
Besham,
Here.
Goplin,
Here.
and Severson,
Here.
and Shuda.
Shoot us here, but connecting to audio. So
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. There she is. Okay. I need a motion to adopt or amend the agenda.
Ada will move to adopt the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Bergstrom will
Second.
second.
Okay, we have a second by Bergstrom. All in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Perfect. So we can get going. The community input. Jennifer, anything we want to do there?
we do not have any members of the public here, nor have I received anything in advance.
Perfect. So we'll see if anyone joins us. We can come back, but for now we will keep going. The consent agenda. I need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the special meeting on July 28th. Is there a motion?
So moved by Goplin.
Okay, is there a second?
Second. Session.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, and then I need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from August 11th.
Can Jada abstain from the last one since I wasn't at that meeting?
Actually, I just noticed that I wasn't at that meeting either. I was thinking that I knew there one of them I wasn't, so I can't second that.
Okay, so we will go back. I need a second for the special, to approve the minutes from the special meeting, July 28th.
This is Bergstrom. I can do it.
Okay, awesome. So all in favor of approving those meeting minutes, say aye, with Beshin and Stata abstaining.
Aye.
Awesome. And then I need a motion to approve the minutes from August 11th, which would have been our last library board meeting.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I was there.
Motion from Beshin. Is there a second?
Second by Stata.
Awesome. All in favor of approval, say aye.
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 And I'm abstaining because I was not at that meeting. So we're fine.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I need a motion to review and pay bills as well as accept financial reports.
So starting this month, we began to have some expenses for our owner's representatives. You'll see that on the top of the second page. We also have Revistas in the middle here, which is a prepay for our 2022 budget. just to order and hold the pricing for our magazines next year. We approve it this year, and then it comes out of 2022 funds. Are there any questions on anything you see on the expense report here?
Looks like no. Looks like we're good.
Yep.
Do you want to go through the accounts too, Jennifer? Anything?
Yeah, these are still I didn't get this month until just like at 4 o'clock, and I didn't have time to distribute those. So these are all still pretty old numbers. We're in pretty good shape for the year again. A lot of our revenues are under, but we also have some cost to offset with not collecting fines. And those are kind of evening out at this point. So we're in good shape. Some of our accounts will be under, but some of them will be spending on pace like normal.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve invoices, to pay bills, and accept the financial report?
So moved.
moved.
Severson.
So it sounds like
Second.
we have Kyle and then Bashan. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Next is the committee reports. The personnel committee will be first.
The results of the director evaluation, we have a meeting set up to go over that with me next week. So that will wrap up that effort this time around.
Sorry, you're running late on that. That is because Coral over here has maybe forgotten things this past month.
Maybe.
So any other personnel committee items?
I don't think
Okay.
so.
Okay. Building committee?
The building committee has not met. We anticipated they might start meeting in September, but we're not sure exactly of what that date will be yet. So they may have a report next month. We'll see how that moves forward.
I was gonna say, not a lot to report. So we're the library director's report.
I'm a couple pages behind here, but we're in the final steps. We just hired our new page position. Marie will be starting with us on Monday. It's official today. We got invited to the second round of Madison Community Foundation's grant cycle. We're one of just 23 applications that got invited. So we'll be applying for $40,000 towards the new library. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to be successful in that application. It would be super helpful for us. Our reopening efforts continue. We're back to normal hours, and we added microfilm and test proctoring services. Basically, the only things not available right now are just normal levels of seating and our Sue Ames room, which we're using for staff efforts. Still trying to do a lot with inclusive services at the library. Highlighted a number of our efforts here. When we did a diversity audit of our collection, we've had some webinars and in-person presentations, and then just highlighted some of the services our community has available to serve everybody better, so our staff is aware of those resources since we have a lot of new staff. We've also had some ongoing issues with the water leaks related to our HVAC system. Those have finally been resolved. And then the other day when Jeff and I went over to the new library property, we found a tree that was kind of broken over the property line, and Public Works and Alliant took care of removing that. So now it's back in good shape that way. That is all I want to highlight right now. You do have a program calendar in your packets. And that's it for today. Are there any questions? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, we can go to library statistics. I think we're good.
For statistics, the interesting thing is that our visits have not rebounded, but our number of checkouts have, which indicates to me that people are coming in and not bringing necessarily all the people in their family that they would have been, but maybe mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or somebody's checking out all the things for everybody, or they're just coming in to pick up, because our checkout numbers are high, but our visits are much lower. So that's an interesting thing to note. Door counts continue to go up though since we've reopened, so hopefully we'll see them continue to rebound as things move forward. You can see the door counts are, you know, a fraction of what they had been before, yet the circulation is almost nearing what it had been before, so that's pretty interesting. We also are doing pretty good in the number of holds people are placing relative to before, and our Wi-Fi use continues to be very high, with more people using our Wi-Fi since we don't have as many computers available as we did before. So our public computer use remains low just because we have limited computers and people are not wanting to linger longer than necessary. So our in-person services also continue to rebound back towards normal levels. And we're starting to see more library card sign up again, with people being able to come in. We did offer an online option, but that wasn't as popular. We still have strong use of our digital formats and expect that to continue, but a lot of people have kind of still resumed using the in-person. We just kind of reached some new audiences, I'd say. That's all I have on stats.
Okay. Communication, village board, anything, Carlene, you want to share? Any cool new things happening?
I was on the phone at the last village board meeting. There was a lot of conversation about the parking, not just the library parking, but the zoning in general for the whole village, since parking for the library kind of brought that into stark relief that the policy for parking in the whole village was very old. And so all the policies were amended, and I think the final on the library was 400, not the 350 per space that had been talked about earlier, and then some things about bringing everything into consistency rather than having a hodgepodge. Otherwise, there was some conversation again about making sure that there's designated senior parking. So just want to make sure that we're always continuing to think about that, since that's being brought up, I think, in person, maybe sometimes more than the things about families and young children, although I personally have a lot of feelings about that as well. So that's about it. There is other, development and things going on around the village, but they're not directly related to the library.
Thank you. Anything from the school district? First day of school, yay! Oh,
that is a huge yay. And thankfully I was able to see a few of you dropping off children on day one, and that was delightful. And today I was visiting RCI and they asked me if I knew how to pronounce a name, and the last name happened to be Steda. And yes, I did know how to pronounce it. So that was delightful too. So actually, yes, it's been a great 3 days last week and 2 days this week, and a lot of happy people, really. That's it.
excellent, thank you. My kids are happily going to school, so that's exciting to me.
Mine too, guys. It's been so long.
So, okay, so discussion and possible action items. Letter A is library closure October 28th due to staff training.
So the village has a mandatory safety training that they didn't run last year because of the pandemic, and we had a lot of staff turnover, so we have a larger than normal number of staff that need to attend that. It's a 6-hour training, and so we have to be flexible with a lot of people's schedules, and we'll just have kind of a shortage of people available to work throughout that day because of the schedules and the number of people we need to have cover things and be at the training. So we would like to get your permission to close early, depending on our staffing availability. Our intent would be to stay open as long as possible, but Thursdays nights do tend to be one of our slowest nights, and so our goal would be to stay open to at least 5 if we can manage it. But I would like to recommend that you approve early closure that day if needed, with the time of closure depending on our staffing needs and availability.
Anybody have any questions, or would somebody make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a
Stevenson?
second?
I can second.
Okay, Beshan,
Question.
any questions, or are we okay with letting them do some training? So all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so that's good. AIA agreement with OPN Architects.
So our agreement's been vetted pretty thoroughly by Jeff Vine, who's our owner's rep, who's on our call tonight. It also got vetted by Martin Shanks, the village administrator, and Laura Callan, the village attorney. So because of vacations, unfortunately, it's taken a lot longer to get this through the pipeline than we really had hoped. Right now, Laura and OPN kind of need to work through some remaining comments that each of them have that they're kind of in a different perspective. And I'm confident that they can resolve those in a way that both parties end up getting what they need out of that conversation. So I am hopeful that they will have that agreement finalized to us in time for possibly a joint meeting with the village on the 20th, if we had enough board members available and it's available in time to meet that deadline, which I've encouraged them to meet. If for some reason it's not available, our board could always hold a special meeting at another time to get that process moving forward, just to make it official. It's a pretty long, complicated agreement. Again, like I said, it's been looked over very carefully by a number of people, and it's just time to get it going and move forward. I'm confident that the terms of the services that Jeff looked at are in good favor for the library, and then that the legal pieces will be well handled. It's a standard architect agreement, so it's not anything that's out of the normal. So I wish I had it tonight. I don't, but you'll hear more from me once I know for sure that we have it and we're ready to go, whether we can do that joint meeting on the 20th and approve it then, or if we need to meet separately to get that going forward. Are there any questions? All right, we don't have any action, then we can move on to the next item.
Next is a new library project update and next steps.
So tonight I invited our owner's representative, Jeff Fine. He's got over 30 years of construction industry experience. He recently had experience being involved in the Wanakee Library project. And he started with us a month ago. Some of you have had the chance to talk to him and some of you haven't, but he's been hard at work for us this past month trying to get our project positioned to move forward. So we're lucky to have him. One of his first responsibilities is to update our project budget, which was developed in 2019, and to make sure that we are using our dollars in a way that meets all our needs and don't have any surprise expenses later on. As part of that, we did start some civil engineering on the site work to make sure all that's ready to move forward and all those pieces can be solved. As we jumped into the engineering on that, some challenges kind of rose to the top and kind of have framed kind of every conversation we've had. The storm requirements at that site are a huge driving factor, and there's some really interesting layout elevation things going on, just the site size. So there's just a lot of things that are impacting kind of the site and what's possible and how those things come together. So many of those things pose challenges either for the site or the library design or have budget implications. So tonight we asked Jeff to join us to kind of walk you through what some of those challenges that have come up in our civil engineering and talking with the architects, what those challenges are, and then what the dollar amounts that go along with those. We thought it was really important for you to have that information so you have a realistic understanding of where we're at right now, and just what those site premium costs are for the project. There's some times where you're going to see that where we're at doesn't really align with the vision that we as a library board or maybe the neighborhood has had for our projects. So we want to make sure that we're managing expectations and all have the same realistic view about where things are at right now. So kind of our goal tonight is just to have Jeff kind of update everybody on where things are at and just to have a open and honest conversation about, you know, what the result will be, where we're at now, and maybe get some direction from you on the best way to move forward. So I'm going to stop talking and let Jeff kind of highlight some things. We'll also have a chance to ask Jeff any questions we have. Some of the pieces are easier to understand than others, so I'm expecting there might be some questions as he kind of walks us through this. So Jeff, I'm turning it over to you.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, Jennifer hit on it a little bit, but it's kind of like what's been happening and how are we to the point where we need to have a meeting to talk about challenges. And I guess what's brought us to the current understanding that we have now that we didn't have a month or 6 months ago is just the more in-depth civil engineering. And we also have a soils report that was done on this site in the past, but we were able to get our hands on that information and analyze that along with the work that the civil engineer has been doing, and really kind of brings to light all the geometric challenges we have, and then site elevation challenges, and then plus the type of soil that we have on the site and the challenges that go with that. So with all of that new information, we're starting to get a clearer view of what we have here in this property. And so as trying to summarize that and go through it with the smaller group, that's the design group that's been meeting, and then to be able to meet with you guys, I put together some notes on a number of what we're calling challenges, and I want to run through that. And there's quite a few items, so I thought maybe it would be better if for the most part I can get through all of those, and then we'll circle back with questions once I get through it, because I think there's items later on in the list that maybe go in conjunction with some of the items that are early on, or maybe answer a question that comes up in the beginning. There's another item later that's related. So if that's okay, I'm going to buzz through all of these, and then we can just kind of look at the big picture of the situation at the end, and then I'd be happy to answer specific questions on specific items, you know, when we get through the whole thing. So the way that I put together the sequence of the list is kind of, if we're thinking about just the sequence that we're going to build or design the property. So it might be odd to some folks, but that's just the way I think of it, kind of building the project in our minds here as we go through this. Jennifer, can you bring up that old site plan again? I just want to orient people on the site. So the top of this diagram is north, and but when you look at the elevations of the site, meaning what's higher and what's lower, the building and that larger tree at the rear of the building, those sit up on the top of the hill. And then the grade drops away kind of significantly as you head to the north, which would be downhill to, is that Jefferson Street?
Johnson Street.
Yes. And so we're going to talk a lot tonight about the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill. So the building sits up at the top of the hill, and then as you go down the hill, we have the parking, and then we have that exit out onto the lower street there. So when we're talking about storm sewer and other utilities, those things want to go downhill. And when we talk about what's happening in the rear of the building, we'll remember that that's the very top of the hill. So this is an old drawing. I don't want to focus on it too much, but it'll just help us as we're going through this list. So we probably won't need to reference that anymore. So the first thing on the list is that there's two large utility lines that run kind of randomly crisscross through the property. There's, you know, large poles, and then there's power on those poles, and there's maybe other types of phone data cable type overhead utility stuff on those poles. The poles are mostly feeding, those power lines are mostly feeding the properties that line both sides of the site. So for us to remove the poles and reroute all of that wiring that we don't want inside the property, and we probably don't want even on the property line up in the air. We want to get all that stuff underground and out of the way. It's going to impact quite a few of the homes and other buildings that are around our site, because they're going to have to get a different type of service and put that electrical underground and potentially other overhead utilities underground. So that's just something that we wish wasn't in the middle of the site. And I think the budget impact for that is maybe $30,000, which isn't that significant. But as we keep kind of going through these site-specific challenges lists, the dollar amounts start to add up. The second thing that I had, the first engineering that we started to do, which is kind of in conjunction with the parking discussion of how many parking stalls can we fit on the site, is we need a significant amount of space to be able to fit stormwater management on the site as well. And there's a couple different ways to do that. We could have regular big wet ponds that you'll see associated with properties where they just have a big old lake out back and all the storm sewer goes to what's called that wet pond. We could have some bioinfiltration basins, which the state and DNR would prefer for us to have, that we handle the water on site and that it percolates and infiltrates into the ground and goes away over time, and it doesn't need to go into the storm sewer system. And then if we don't have room for those two types of things, we could create underground storage facilities, but those are more expensive and not the preferred method of handling it. So in looking at the room that we have and how we're going to design those systems, we're going to have to use a combination of kind of all three of those, versus if we had enough acreage for the site, we maybe would do the least costly, wet pond solution. But we're not able to do that because we don't have the room. So we've estimated the budget impact of kind of a hybrid stormwater system at $200,000. And again, part of the reason for that is to keep enough space to have as many parking stalls as we need on the site, plus we need a place to put the building. So that's one that still needs to be finalized, but we'll get to that a little bit more here as we go along. One of the things that came up when we got the information from the existing soils report, and the soils report, what they did is they go out and they do borings on the property and they figure out what type of soil we have at different locations on the site. For our property, the lower 2/3 of the site, and especially the lowest end of the site. So again, if we're thinking of at the bottom of the hill, where the parking and that driveway entrance was coming in, just because naturally that's where everything settles, and the kind of this whole area, all of the existing stormwater kind of runs down the hill and ends up in that location. Those soils are they're very saturated. They're poor soils to build on. And because they're saturated in the type of soil, it's not very good for infiltration. So we have low infiltration for most of our site. And there's going to be some more special geotechnical investigation that's going to need to be done to figure out exactly where those locations are and how that plays into the stormwater management cost as well. So originally we budgeted $200,000 for the stormwater system, but then there's probably another $20,000 involved in this more soil investigation, because we've got this lack of infiltration. And the lack of infiltration also limits what type of systems we could have. So, bio-infiltration basins that are, natural plants where that water goes and settles out and percolates into the ground, we won't be able to have those types of facilities on that lower 2/3 of the site, just because the water won't go anywhere because of the type of soil. So that's just some more money to add to the list. And then there's been, a lot of discussion about the quantity of parking stalls. And it was good that the village changed their ordinance, which if we do the calculations on how many stalls we need to have for the square footage of our building and the number of staff that we have, that comes out to be 98 parking stalls. And kind of independently of that, I wanted to make sure that we don't end up with too few stalls. So part of it was, yes, the village is requiring us to have more than we can fit, but on the other hand, we don't want fewer stalls than we need to service the size of building now and in the future, and the types of programs and things that you want to have there. So, you know, just looking at other libraries and trying to proportionally figure that out, somewhere around 98, 100 stalls, that's a good number for our property. But we probably don't want to have less than that, even if somebody would let us have less than that. We don't want less than that to serve our building. So we need to find a place, you know, on site to be able to get that many stalls in there. Once the stormwater is designed and we have a building footprint, there's only so much area left over for parking. And one of the things that we were starting to do in trying to figure out this puzzle of where can everything fit on this site is we were thinking about reducing the drive lanes between stalls and reducing the size of the stalls themselves. Now, those are things that we could do, that we could ask the fire department for a special variance on the width of the drive lanes, and we could ask for smaller parking stalls as part of the PUD process for us to get the project approved. But again, the question is that a good idea? You know, people will kind of sense and feel that something's amiss, and you know, that it'll feel like we've cramped the site and we haven't done maybe what was best for those parking areas. So that's a challenge. It doesn't really have a budget impact, but it works into these other kind of site size and shape challenges. Another item that we have that came up from the soils report is that the soil that we have on the, you know, the lower 2/3 of the site at the bottom of the hill gets progressively worse. And if we want to build a parking lot on top of that, we're going to have to excavate out more and more of that soil and bring in good fill or stone to create the support and base for the parking lot. So that's one where it's just, you can start to quantify the depth of the poor soil. We know the square footages of those parking areas, and we can calculate a volume of material that's going to have to be removed and replaced to be able to put roads and parking on that. And so we were able to budget $150,000 of just removing and replacing what we call poor soil. Now, something that maybe goes along with that, again, if we're thinking about now we're down building parking lots, depending on when we're building the parking lot, there's going to be varying levels of water in that soil, and it might make it more and more difficult to build the parking lots depending on what time of year it is, because everybody else's stormwater in that area also kind of gravitates towards that area. So if we dig a hole 3 feet deep at the bottom of the hill, there's chances that there's going to be water in the bottom of that hole. And if we're excavating out a parking lot, there might be water in the entire excavation of the parking lot. Or if we're in a rainy part of the year, it just might make it very difficult during construction that we'll have to have dewatering systems in place to try to figure out how to deal with that. I didn't put any money to that at the moment, but it's something that could become a construction cost while we're building the project that would have to come out of our contingency. Another thing that has to do with excavation is that our building that we have up at the top of the hill, we want to have the rear of the building. I think we envisioned having an outdoor space, and that even that plan that we showed you guys still has a tree back there. And you know, you're kind of imagining all of that yellow area back there being open space where you could walk out and there could be people gathering, or you could have programs out there, or you can just have views out the back window of the building onto this green space. Well, the reality is that because it's into the hill, we're actually excavating the building into the hill, and there's a significant difference in elevation between the front door and the doors that would go out to the back of the building where the tree is. So we can handle that in one of two ways. We could raise the building up 8 feet in the front And we could try to get the grade so we could still get out and basically walk out onto the level where that existing tree is. Or we would keep the building elevation down in the front where it wants to be, because you're coming up at a certain slope up from Main Street, and then you've got certain slopes that you need to maintain going down the hill to get out the other entrance. And the front of the building probably wants to be down at that elevation. If we did jack the building up, we would have to spend a lot of money on fill in the front of the building and the front parking lot and the slopes for those drive lanes and parking. Or what would probably happen is we would keep the building down, excavate it into the hill, but then all of that stuff behind the building is basically recessed into the hill. We would lose all of that would be excavated out, including the tree, because the new elevation for walking out the back door would be, a number of feet lower than what the existing tree is sitting on at the moment. And then the next line item I'm going to talk about is you need to have a retaining wall back there to make all of that stuff kind of happen. So the way I think to think about it would be, if you're building a house and you want to have a walkout basement, your backyard needs to fall away from your house. If you want to have a walkout basement and you're building your house up into the back of a hill, well, you walk out the basement door and you look at a retaining wall, and maybe you climb up some steps to somehow get up out of your hole that you created behind your house. And so that's what we're doing here with this building, but I don't think that's what anybody imagined was going to be happening out there when you walk out that back door. And so the aesthetics and the idea of what we were envisioning for that space is one thing. The other thing is just the cost that's associated with it. So whether we're filling in the front or we're excavating and removing a bunch of material at the rear of the building, one way or another, in the front or the back, we have to deal with that elevation problem. And that's about $120,000 worth of either fill or excavation and removal, depending on which way we go with setting the building there. And then there's also cost to the retaining wall, depending on how much retaining wall we want to put in. That is going to show us how much basically recessed patio we could have at the rear of the building. And so the cost of the retaining wall and the size of that space that we create are related. But I said that, let's start with a $25,000 budget for that retaining wall. And again, that's something that, we wouldn't have that site specific cost if we had the elevations working in our favor, at the back of the building, instead of kind of the opposite of what we'd like them to be. And then the next note that I had, which I've already kind of talked about already, is just what that space feels like, what the views look like. There is some trees along the property line back in that corner to the, whatever it is, southwest. But again, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that stuff. And it's just a lot different human experience when you can stand and you can see for a mile into the distance with a view versus you can see, 50 yards, and then you start to either see retaining wall or ground that's, rising, that's impeding your view. So there's kind of a big concern about that. I don't know if anybody on the call has been to the Wanakee Library, and I don't want to constantly bring that up, but what's really turned out to be wonderful about the site that their library is on is when you come out the back of that building, we basically created a downtown, village park along the creek. It has the slopes falling away to the creek. There's outdoor spaces and there's outdoor gathering spaces for people and all of those things, just because of the way the topography works and that, that amount of land behind the building was available. And so I think that's something that we're really missing here. The other thing that's going to happen, and part of it is in the back where we would be excavating into the hill for the building, but really the entire site is either going to be building footprint that's going to be excavated, or it's going to be some sort of stormwater facility that's going to be excavated, or every other kind of square inch that's left over is going to be site concrete in either the rear patio in the back or our parking, which now is kind of ending up being kind of wall to wall, either through drive lanes and parking. And so just as a function of creating the grades for all of that site concrete work or the building footprint or the stormwater management, every single tree on this property is going to be gone. It's going to be the first thing that's going to happen when we start the project. And the other thing that goes along with it is that as we're excavating a few feet down along the perimeter where we've got parking that's very close to the property line, any of the trees that are along those property lines, even if the trunk is, 3 feet on the other guy's property, when we excavate down and you take out, if you imagine that the roots for a tree are basically the size of the canopy of the tree, but, in reverse, upside down. And so when we do that excavation, we're significantly going to get into those. And I think that there's a lot of trees that we're going to have to just identify from the beginning, and we're going to take those down. Now, that's going to lead to another one of the problems as we get a little bit further down the list here of like, okay, now what happens when you take those things out of the way as a natural barrier? But I think it's important for people to know that, not just the big tree, but all the trees are gonna be gone. And there's a cost to remove the trees too. So I have that budgeted on this list as $20,000. And then kind of like talking about the back of the building where there isn't a lot of space for gathering or programming, there really isn't any green space anywhere else on the site either. So there's maybe a couple of very small pockets, but things that are maybe in between parking and stormwater and those types of areas, the grades won't be very conducive to spending time in those spaces either. So if we're just trying to imagine a large enough area to have, 50 kids and parents for a program outside, we really don't have that kind of space here. And I think that's and not only in the back of the building, but basically anywhere on the property. And again, I didn't have a budget impact for that, but I think it certainly affects the vision of what we're trying to do here. The other thing is that, even in the drawing that Jennifer had showed you, there was always thought of having a chunk of building where we could do a future expansion. And, here that little orange triangle is into the parking lot. Well, as we're doing the things we need to do to get the layouts that we've been looking at recently, that gets worse. And so, I just want to, again, we're going to say all this out loud. There isn't going to be room for expanding the square footage or the footprint of the building, and the parking that you would have to add that would be associated with that square footage. And then when you add parking, you have to add a way to manage the stormwater from those, impervious parking areas, and all those things kind of go together. And the bottom line is we don't have space on our site for any of that kind of expansion. So when we're talking about building a facility for the next 100 years, it's concerning that we don't have those types of things to be able to be planned into what's happening here, just simply because we don't have space for it on the site. And again, I didn't have a budget impact for that item, but I thought that one was probably something that would catch people's attention if we're making this kind of investment for the long haul. And then something else that's happening, and it's hard to explain without looking at some of the drawings that we've come up with, but the civil engineer is having quite a bit of a challenge to figure out how to get people through the book drop area and dropped off at the front of the building. So the way our site works is that we've got our building that's built into the hill. And so it's basically backed up into a corner. There's only one place to get to and from our building from a vehicle standpoint, and it's basically right out front. What's shown on this drawing, which is old, shows a bunch of space here to create a circular drive-through and a front entry to the building. The reality is that because there's a bunch of stormwater up in this area, stormwater management up in this area, really the drive lane to get over to Main Street kind of goes right past the front of the building. And so we've got to try to get cars swinging into the book drop one way and then you want to drop somebody off in the front of the building out the other door. So we've got cars coming from both directions, basically trying to get to the same spot. One guy's trying to get to the book drop to put the book out the left-hand driver's side door as the other person's driving up, trying to get the passenger out the right side of the passenger side of the vehicle. And there's a big conflict there. So we really don't have the space to figure out how to work that out. And we can't even rearrange inside the building to get the book drop on the different side of the building because there's no way to get a road or a driveway up to any of the other 3 sides of the building. So that's one that's just, you know, again, probably not a budget impact, but just a tricky challenge trying to figure out how to make that stuff work. Something that just came up earlier is the lack of parking adjacent to the building. Again, our new drawings that we have really have the drive lane, you know, coming right past the building. We're trying to create a drop-off area. We're trying to get the book drop, but there really isn't a place then to also have, you know, a dozen parking stalls that are right up on the sidewalk that you get out of your vehicle, step on the sidewalk and walk into the building. All of that parking is across the drive lane. So, you know, you can figure out ways to have parking a little bit further away from the building and create kind of one pedestrian corridor to get up to the front door. But if we're talking about seniors or people that have special access needs and you're 150 or 200 feet away from the building, you still have that challenge of getting from, you know, point A to point B. And I think everybody involved would like to have those, you know, a certain number of stalls that are right up adjacent to the building, but we don't have a way to get all of that stuff configured. And again, not a budget impact, but something that's going to be challenging to be able to have. And then along the property lines, we've excavated and either killed or removed a bunch of trees along the property lines. We have kind of a screening issue that goes both ways. So I'm sure that there's property owners along there that don't want to look at our parking lot. And there's a couple of buildings that maybe when we get the trees down, we don't want to be looking in the back of those properties from the perspective of the library patrons or the people in the parking lot. So, you know, having some landscape berms and some fencing to put up that type of screen. But again, it's because of the way that this site is configured, we'd have to do that, you know, in some significant areas, a lot of lineal footage of that type of stuff. And there isn't a whole heck of a lot of room between the parking areas and the property lines to create a landscape berm. So it's going to be difficult to do it with plantings. Maybe we're going to have long stretches of fence that we're going to have to put up to create that kind of screening and try to get landscaping interspersed wherever we can, you know, to create that. But again, that's a cost that maybe we wouldn't have if we didn't have that adjacency to those properties. And that's about budgeted at $25,000 just for the cost to be able to put something in that area. And then the last item that I had on the list, which isn't a cost that would impact our library budget, but would certainly be a cost for the village, is that there's been an enhanced crosswalk that's been designed on Main Street to get across the street to get to the entrance that we have where the library comes off of Main Street, so that pedestrians coming from downtown or from the school, you know, can get across that street. And it's more than just some curb bump outs and some, you know, red concrete or something. There's lights planned there and lots of other changes to create kind of an intersection. So it's really something that vehicles have to navigate, you know, to be able to create that crosswalk. The village just redid that street, you know, they just poured concrete there a couple weeks ago. And it wasn't part of that project. They were planning to do it in the future. They wouldn't do it if the library doesn't go there. But for them to remodel that and create this enhanced crosswalk is estimated at $100,000 from Strand, who are the engineering firm that designed that. So it's another consideration when we kind of look at the total impact. You know, that would be something that I guess could be avoided from the village if that didn't have to go there. So when we look at all of the items that I talked about and add up all of the budgets that we have on our side of the ledger, it's $590,000 of cost to the library project that if we had a different configuration of our site or different soils or different topography and elevations, that maybe we wouldn't have those, what we're calling site specific costs for the project. And that doesn't include the $100,000 for the crosswalk that the village would have come out of their budget. So I guess before we talk about our overall library budget and how this impacts that, are there specific questions about any of the items? Yes.
A couple. This is Coral Goblin. I really appreciate the thoroughness with which we've just discussed this. And as someone who is fairly aware of like how this project kind of exists in like the wider community, I want to clarify a couple of things. So some pretty strong statements were made about the trees and the exact amount of green space that will be existing when we are done. What I'm hearing you say though, towards the end of this, is that there are limitations based on like the actual site we have and based on the configuration and the layout that we had currently planned without these site things being known, then we would end up in this situation where there is no, or some of the existing trees, all of the existing trees are kind of part of, one is super cautious how to say it, that all of the existing trees might be not savable with the current configuration. And I want to clarify that that would mean that we would need to create landscaping or install landscaping that might accomplish some of that green space purpose, and or change the configuration of the building that we potentially proposed several years ago before we had knowledge of this. Or are you suggesting that based on kind of where we're at, there is not really a great way for us to end up with green space in this, regardless of how we reconfigure our expectations of the library building itself? Does that make sense?
Well, kind of. I think the short answer, well, and we've thought about these things, there isn't a whole heck of a lot of place to replace the trees, you know, spaces for that. So
right.
If we took the, you know, let's just kind of, we're removing this amount and then we're putting back about the same amount. Well, we physically don't have places to put that many, you know, if we're talking about square feet of canopy or diameter of trunk or, you know, number of trees or whatever the metric is, that we're going to say, oh, well, yeah, these have to go away, but we'll put them all back and it'll be about the same. I think there's going to be a net loss of natural stuff, you know, because we're replacing it with a whole bunch of things that aren't landscaped areas. So that kind of answers the question. And we're going to get to here in a minute of kind of like, there's two different ways that we can go now that we know that this site has a lot of constraints. It's, do we significantly change the program, the size of the building and what we envision for our new library? Or do we investigate the possibility of other sites? And I know that as soon as I say both of those things, everybody in the room says, we don't want to do either one of those two things. And, you know, I'm here to tell you that you have to do one of the two. That's why we're having the discussion. But let me get through the budget impacts and then we'll get to those tough decisions. So we had another question, Carlene?
Yes, I'm right there with you. I hear what you're saying, that there's not going to be green space, which is something that has been highly valued by everybody who's had input into this, and that the soil sucks and there's nothing we can do about that. It's the same way all over the village, and we know it impacts things all the time. Houses have been moved, parks have been made and shut down. So our village just doesn't have good soil, and there's not a whole lot to do about that. So I'm of the thought of, as hard as it is, we want a really fabulous library. Why would we continue to consider this lot that is not going to give us most of what we want? The size of it, all those other things, except that there are some donors who want that there. And I feel like, holy cow, we want a really good library with green space and places for outdoor convening and those kinds of things. And the environmental impacts alone of this library in this spot just seem to me to be too much to overcome.
And I would just
So it's
want
not really
to
a
mention,
question, it's just an observation.
yeah, I think that's kind of why we're having this meeting. Is I think I was surprised as we had these conversations, you know, that we can do this, but and the limitation, the list and the challenges kind of kept surfacing as we had, you know, got deeper and deeper into the civil engineering, which was eye-opening to me, and I thought would be something that was important for us to have a conversation about. Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about where we're at with the budget, which I think will be helpful to talk about next. Jeff, do you want to kind of just talk about where we're at with that?
Sure. So, you know, coming into this, I was aware of what was being planned, you know, before I got hired. And I talked to Jennifer a number of years ago, just checking in to see what you guys were thinking about. And obviously the site was a challenge. And then the second thing that I'm thinking of coming into my new role is, hey, it's kind of like the same thing that we're doing with all of the site challenges. We need to get these all out on the table. We need to make sure everybody understands them. And then the same thing with the budget. Let's try to make sure we've got every single line item that we can think of, you know, trying to add my experience to that list and the other people that are involved in our design group of what does everybody think they see here that we need to be budgeting for. And so we've been through that exercise, and Jennifer and I have run through that a couple of times. And when we incorporate this $590,000, the total project is more than $800,000 over budget. So, you know, just looking at a total development budget, we're looking at all of the sources that we have for funds and the village money, you know, the library impact fees and fundraising and all of those things. And then we're looking at every last thing that we need to spend money on, from, you know, erosion control permits to everybody's fees that are involved in working on the project, all of those things, and then a construction budget and a reasonable contingency, you know, so that we have all of that stuff that we need. And we certainly don't want to be having budget problems, you know, getting halfway into this. We want to identify that stuff ahead of time. So if we just think of it in round numbers, if my list of stuff is $600,000 and we're $800,000 over budget, if we had a $200,000 problem at this point in the project, I wouldn't even think about it. I'd say, don't worry about it. If we can't find ways to be clever and build a better mousetrap and solve problems and figure out a way to come up with $200,000 between now and the end of the job, when we've got a $12.5 million project, you know, shame on us for not being able to be very smart. But the problem is if it's $800,000 or if it's $1 million in cost that we're trying to overcome, you know, that's not going to happen. So, you know, we're faced with two things at the same time. The library is now not going to be what we're envisioning, or, you know, what we dreamed it was going to be. And, oh, by the way, to get the library that you don't really want to have is going to cost you more money than you thought. How does everybody feel about that? And so those two things working together are kind of, you know, bringing it to light where we have to significantly think about exploring other sites. So I guess coming to you guys tonight is we have two paths. One, we have to significantly reduce what we're doing with the library, or we have to get agreement from you guys that we're going to have a discussion about exploring other sites. And the next step for that would be we would have to have this same kind of educational discussion with the village board. And, I think that it's basically an education campaign. If we can get everybody to understand all of these things, as well as the design team starting to understand them, then the answer becomes clear. But when, we need to widen that net of people that are educated about what's happening with the site, because, people just have it in their head that it'll work, it'll fit, you can get rid of a little bit of this, or you can do something different over there, and it's all going to work out. But the more you get into it and the more educated you get, you see it's just like an overwhelming amount of challenges, and that it's probably not in the best interest. So I guess.
So can I just say, I also think though that a lot of what we're going to encounter is that we are kind of coming up against a little bit of a sunk cost. But the fact that we've put a lot of eggs in this particular basket already in terms of actually owning the property and those sorts of things. So I agree. And I think along with education, it also is going to potentially require us to be very thoughtful about how we portray the money that we have already put into this particular site, and like how we think that we would be recouping that. I'm hearing what you're saying. I guess I'm adding additionally just kind of what we know from working within our own community here.
Right.
Right. And let's talk.
I just want to kind of add on to what Coral was saying. I too really appreciate you giving us this hard news now instead of later. Okay. But I'm also kind of frustrated because, it's been a couple of years now, and I'm kind of amazed that nobody else has realized this up until this point. And I sort of wonder what OPN has said about this when you've talked to them, because they presented this building to us on this site, and they looked at the site and they had the soil reports, and I'm just really disappointed that we're just learning about all of this at this late date.
Carrie, can I address,
Right.
I just want to address a few of your points that you brought up, Carrie. When the library board was deciding originally whether to go with this site or not, the village had purchased it, and then kind of library, I guess, got to decide if this was the right site for them. If you look at the civic campus plan and the documentation that was showing a library on the site at that time, it doesn't show elevations. It shows a 33,000 or 35,000 square foot building with very limited parking that wouldn't have met the code. You don't see the elevations, you don't see the storm. It says the soils were good, and parts of the report, if you just read those parts and don't think about the parking and things, that might be where that was coming from. And so, I think the decision made on the information that was available at that time, didn't get into some of those nuances that we're learning about and working through. The soils report we didn't remember we had until we just got started now, and Jeff Rao, that was kind of sitting in this giant box that went with the property when the village acquired it. And so that was information that, usually you do soil borings once you know where the building is going to go. And so we might not have been able to have this conversation for a month or two down the road, had that been the case. And we were fortunate that Jeff at the village hall remembered that was available. So, I was sitting here banging my head saying, how could we not have known? But then the grades, you look at something on paper and it looks one way, and then you take those elevations into effect, and that's different. And then the dollars, added complication. So it's just really complicated, and we were up until 6 months ago not at a point where we even had the money to do half of the building we needed, which makes it complicated as well from that standpoint. So.
I understand all that, Jennifer, but I would still like to know what OPN has to say.
And the other thing, Carrie, is we hired OPN to draw us a pretty picture to help us basically with fundraising, right? To try to come up with an idea and to make a building that'll fit our program.
Right.
We didn't hire them to look at the site, to look at the water, to look at everything else. We knew there was going to be some challenges, and what we're doing now is, I guess, putting value to those challenges. challenges,
So-
right?
So now the pretty picture has to change. And going
Potentially.
back to Coral's discussion about sunk costs, now we're gonna have to ask OPN to draw us a new pretty picture.
Not
Correct?
necessarily.
Well,
You could
let's-
take that pretty picture and look at other things too, but you know,
That's
it's kind
that's
of,
what
let's talk
that's what
about-
I'm wondering.
yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about sunk costs. So the big sunk cost, and it's not really sunk, is that the village paid a dollar amount for the property and the village owns the property.
Right.
There's other uses and there's still value to the property to the village. So
Absolutely.
in my mind, the properties has the same value the day that the village bought the property. If they paid more than they should have at the time that they paid for it, you know, they still
Right.
have that differential to recoup, but there's other uses that are more appropriate for the property and they can, and those dollars, they still own something of value. And then we have had a bunch of discussion with OPN and even the cost of redesign fees, right? For people to redo some work. And so we've negotiated that to be kind of minimal with them. And the concept plan and the overall, you know, building layout and all of that programming, basically the conceptual design stuff that was done, that's all portable. And that's work that isn't wasted. And that can go somewhere else. What we were starting to do right now, and the reason we didn't start it until, you know, 3 weeks ago, is that you guys got to the end of conceptual design and then you had 2 years where nothing happened. The next thing that you would have done 2 years ago is you would have started doing some civil engineering and you would have figured this stuff out. So yes, it could have been figured out sooner, but really this is the point in vetting out the site that you never got to this point. So anyway, and so as far as sunk cost goes, I don't think there's a lot. Because we were just getting ready to spend the big dollars on doing the real engineering and design. And that's kind of why we're having this discussion right now, because I sure wouldn't want to spend more money on a site that we're starting to see is maybe not the right site.
Right. And the fact that what you just said, I think is really helpful. And the fact that you've talked to OPN and that you were able to negotiate with them, I think that's really helpful when we go back to like you talk about manage expectations. Those are all really good points to share right up front with everybody, you know,
Right.
So they understand
and
that we're pivoting at the right time and saving everybody money by doing that.
Right. Let's make the hard decision now, not after we know that maybe we are gonna be going down the wrong path for some period of time. And as far as what does OPN think right now today, we've had Jenkins Survey, who's our civil engineering firm, has been at all of our meetings for the last month, and OPN's been right at the table as well.
Okay.
So everybody, including Jeff, the Public Works Director, OPN, the civil engineer, myself, Jennifer, Martin has been at some of those meetings. Jenny's been at some of those meetings. The people in that group are all, I guess I'm speaking for that group, that everybody agrees with the things that I'm saying to the most part. So at least you know that OPN isn't sitting somewhere thinking, oh, we still think it's a wonderful site.
Right.
They've come to the same conclusions.
The team, if I'm hearing you correctly, then that the team that is most actively involved in this project is all on the same page and everybody's working together and communicating well. And you've all reached basically the same conclusion that you are breaking to us tonight, that we now then have to break to the rest of the village.
Right.
I would
and so
say that we've come to a
the-
point where we need to make a decision. I
Yeah.
would not say
Right.
that the group has come together and said, this isn't going to work, right? That's not what happened.
Well, no,
And they
because
came together and said, hey, these are challenges. These are things we want to make sure everybody knows about. We want to make sure that we're presenting it so everybody is eyes wide open so that we are doing the right thing for the village. That's what that group has come to
yeah,
an
I
agreement
agree.
with.
I was
You
gonna
guys are
say,
Sorry, I was just going to add to what Jenny was saying, because you guys are the decision makers. That group is, staff, either village staff or paid staff that is working on solving this problem for us. So if the direction is to move with this site, they will do that. And it's just going to, have those cost and, design implications that Jeff talked about. So they're not, they'll do whatever we tell them to do, and make it work, but, understanding that there's going to be trade-offs and budget costs associated with that, and how the vision, what's the vision and how will those fit into the vision. So Jenny, Coralie, do you have a question? I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just going to say, first of all, I want to make sure that it is super clear. I am glad we are having this conversation now. I would much rather have to make a tough decision here than like even a little bit in the future. And then I want to emphasize that as a library board member who has been involved since at least early on in this, okay, not early on, but 3 years, that's enough, right? I want to make sure that I emphasize that, like, as a library board member, my priority is to have, as Jeff was saying, a library that can stand like the test of time. And I would rather make a tough decision and, potentially make our timeline go out a little bit more, rather than build a building that, like our last building, would be essentially already too small or not the right, working space for us the minute that we put it up. So just to be clear, my priority would be, no matter what happens, we build the library the community needs over the location that we have potentially put money into.
Kyle?
Yeah, I want to just comment on this from my perspective. And like Coral, I've been involved with this for quite some time. And to me, I don't see this as too much of a surprise. I think we've known that this site was not ideal for some time, and things have kind of trickled in, whether it be parking, whether it be water, whether it be, the neighbors and what they would like to see with, and how that relates to how we can build the library that needs to function to meet the needs of this community. Like, there's no surprise in my face right now. To me, this was something that's been coming for quite some time. I think we've brought it up with the village in the sense of, hey, we should explore other sites, and been shut down because of, donors really want that. And I think the decision is, do we want to follow the path that the donors want? And unfortunately, that's going to give us a space that's not going to meet the needs, whether we're talking in the box or outside of the box. And so spaces, we're going to have to make decisions, and there's going to be things that are cut from that have been identified as really important for the community, whether they're outdoor spaces for activities, whether they're indoor spaces for certain things, whether it's an opportunity for us to add on, whether it's green, a green space setting, whether it's the build and the materials, because we're gonna have to cut in that to fund other things. Or do we want to pivot and take the majority of what the community wants, sans or minus the site, and relocate that thought process to a place that more accommodates the needs of the community, the desires of it, the green space, the services, and all of those things. And so to me, this isn't really a surprise. I think it's just been a matter of getting to this point where we need to have this conversation in a more serious matter, that it's more fact-based and is more like, hey, we're drawing a line in the sand. If you want to move this direction, you're going to get something that is subpar. Otherwise, we need to pivot, and let's find a space that's better. And I'm in favor for the latter.
Do I see somebody else have a hand?
Yeah, I was wondering, are there comments from anybody else that's on the call? Those are good things to hear.
Yes, this is Leslie. Oh, go ahead, Carlene.
No, go.
I just want to say what a wonderfully well-spoken group. And I just want to emphasize the fact that we, our highest responsibility is building a building not just that meets the needs now, but can potentially has a chance of meeting the needs in the future. And I too am not surprised. Many people I spoke to have said, I think you're going to find that site doesn't work. So I'm not really surprised that we're sitting here today talking about the fact that the site doesn't work. But our greatest responsibility is really to build for the future. So thank you.
Yes.
And I just want to emphasize everything. Yeah, I'm just going to reinforce everything that everybody's already said and say that I think if Jeff is this frank in his presentation with other stakeholders, that they will understand completely why this is not the appropriate place. I don't think it's if, I said because we want green space, we want adequate parking, we want safe drop off, we want all of these things, and we can't have it in that site. And so I think it's a no-brainer that people will actually be like Coral and say, I'm glad we made that decision now and not go down this false path of something that we can have in a place that is not adequate.
So Jenny, I'm going to just propose that maybe the next step is to have this conversation with the village. We don't exist in a vacuum. We do have those community partners. We have a lot of stakeholders who are interested in the outcome of this. Would the next logical step be getting direction from this board that maybe we want to talk to the village and have this conversation with the village board? Because we can't really go in a different direction if we don't have their support, and this information might be valuable for them to have as well. Is that maybe something we should discuss if we want to do, or what would be the best course of action, Jenny?
I agree. I want to thank everybody for their listening and for their comments about wanting to build the right thing on the right spot for the right reasons, right? That's what we want to look for. But we're a partnership with the village. And I think the next step is to have that conversation with the village board. I don't know if it's a joint meeting or if it's just a conversation of, us, Jennifer, you and I presenting at the library board with Jeff, maybe, or at the village board with Jeff. I think but that next step has to be with the village board. Right now they own the land that we're building on, right? So if we're looking for another site, we're trying to figure out kind of what those options are, if there's plans, if there's thoughts. So I think you're right that the next step is to talk to the village board. Do you think of a joint meeting makes sense, or do you think that it's more of a presentation and then a discussion with them first?
I think we could do either. I think there might be some value in having all the stakeholders hear what their thoughts and comments are as they learn the information like you did. Again, if not here, where will be the question, and at what cost? Even if something else is positioning us for the future, how do we get there? How do we make sure it doesn't delay the project for a long time? Maybe a few months would be fine, but we don't want it to get bumped off. We have donors and community members all are very excited and motivated to help us make this happen, and we want to do that. So how do we move forward from here, and what's next? So I think that conversation would be good, and to be able to hear their reactions and feedback firsthand, like we just have as this group, to decide what do we do and how do we move forward, and what's the best solution for the village.
So Jennifer, did we already have potentially a joint meeting on the 20th already?
Yeah, we were talking about a joint meeting on the 20th for the contract approval, so I could see if we could if we get direction tonight. Maybe we should vote on our official direction, and then I could say that our board's requesting a chance to update them on where we're at, and to have a conversation about it. Might be a good next step. Does that make sense? Leslie, did you have your hand raised?
I did, and I think it's just a point of clarification because I'm trying to make sure that I'm able to articulate the important points why this may not be the best site for the library we want to build. And I know how important sustainability is to the community. As a matter of fact, they even voted to spend more money because of how important that is to them. So when we're thinking about the problems with rainwater retention, and I know we would do the very best we could to not have a minimal impact, but is it fair to say that there are potential complications even with the best that we can do on the site and water retention? Are we potentially causing more problems within the village if we were to build on that site?
I wouldn't say that we'd be causing more complications. I think you would see water retention in a way that wouldn't necessarily make sense for a library, right? You're going to see a lot of large ponds, which when I see ponds, I think of kids jumping in them and not being, you know, more mosquitoes, those type of things.
Okay.
I don't think you're going to cause more issues. I think it's just
Okay.
not going to necessarily be done in a way that is quite what you would want for the function of the space, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? If we do decide to explore a new site, how does that impact the contract with OPN? Because they can't really get started on anything until we decide on a site for sure, right?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. Because of the conversations we were having when Jeff was hired, we built in to his contract that his services would be valid no matter what site we were on. And so because of that, we kind of asked OPN to do something similar. We kind of knew some of the conversations that were coming up. And so Jeff kind of helped frame that in a way that, you know, if we can just take the architecture we have somewhere else, then great.
Right.
You know, if there's additional design and work that needs to be done or redone or to be customized, then there's, you know, going to be some cost to make those transitions, depending on how complicated it is. Jeff, do you want to add anything to that or clarify what I just said and make sure I got it correct?
Well, I want to reveal my personality just a little bit if I haven't already. To answer Carrie's question, we can't do anything until we decide what site we're going to be on. So we don't have a meeting scheduled for this Friday, and we don't have one scheduled for next Friday either, because one of the reasons that we're pushing this now to get the question called is that we really don't want to spend any more money trying to figure out compromises on the existing site if that's not what's happening. So, you know, like Jennifer and Jenny were saying, let's put it in front of you guys tonight and let's see what the village board has to say. And if people are starting to think about different possibilities, then we don't have any, you know, we don't have work to do on this site until that question gets answered.
So I think Carlene has her hand raised and then Coral.
It seems to me the next step is to ask for a joint meeting, even if we don't have a contract with OPN to approve, so that this can be presented and that we can move to that next step.
I was going to say too that it would be good to be able to quantify some of the concessions that we would need to make. So Jenny, what you were saying about there needing to be, you know, ponds in order to deal with stormwater, those are the sorts of things that I think our community wants to know, right? I think the community very much cares very deeply about the green space here. And I think that additionally, any other concessions around that would be required might be helpful, not just for the village board, but for the community members who are like watching this meeting right now to know why we are choosing to like look towards this path and like what kinds of things we are listening to. What the community has told us, and what they've told us is that these concessions are most likely not in line with what the community values. Does that make sense?
That was really well said, Coral.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
To add to that, I mean, I'm finding this document that you sent to us, the site challenges 9/1/21. I mean, I think it's an excellent summary, and it really lays it all out and covers all the potential budget impacts. And I think that could and should be shared with the village and the public, and they can see where we're all coming from.
So when Carlene suggested we had a joint meeting, was that Carlene, was that in the form of a motion, or would anybody like to make that motion?
It wasn't, but I can certainly make that motion that we request a joint meeting on the 20th with the village board to discuss the site challenges and next steps.
I would second that motion. This is Coral.
Thanks, Coral. Any other questions or discussion as part of that motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you guys' thoughtful words and listening. And Jeff, thank you for the presentation. It's very good to have information shared that can help guide us to the future, right? So I just want to thank everybody for listening and being an active participant in this discussion.
Okay, Jenny, you're muted.
Sorry, I was kind of talking to myself. Is there any other discussion about that, or should we go on to the next item? Okay, I'm going to say we're going to go to the 2022 library budget request. Just as exciting.
And actually, we haven't had our chance to talk to the village about the budget. So this was on there just in case we did have new information to discuss. We do not have any feedback from them about our budget requests. With the new administrator, the process is slightly different than last year when I think we had a joint meeting in September and then again in October. And so this year it'll be just one meeting when we present a budget like all the other departments. And so they haven't met with any of the other departments except for the senior center, whose budget process is a little different. So I will update you once we've had our meeting to discuss, where they're at and any recommendations they're providing for you in your request. So no action needed tonight.
Okay. And then future meetings, do we want to discuss in person or stay virtual? I guess my vote would be virtual for a little while longer, just with how things seem to be not the best, but I will take other opinions.
I agree.
As much as I'd like to be in person with all of you, since there's not a space at the library to actually meet, it seems like this is the best accommodation, and you can be wherever you are.
And then the other piece of that, if we have a motion, would be, do we want to talk about this every month, or do we want to say we're going to be in person through a certain date so that we don't have to have this conversation regularly unless we want to?
My sense on that is that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Carlene.
COVID is really scary, and I'm not willing to say at this date we're going to go back to being in person with so many things up in the air and escalating infections. I just assume stay virtual for as long as we need to and revisit it every time.
So I guess the question becomes to that point, do we want to revisit it next month, or do we want to just say we're going to go virtual for the rest of the year and revisit it then, so that we don't revisit it every month? Either way is fine. I guess just direction from you on which you prefer.
I would be oh, sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Kyle, did you look like you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna throw out, maybe we want to do through the end of the year. I think that sounds reasonable. It's one of those things where we can always explore it. We can change our mind. We have the ability to do that. And setting it out then, I think we know we're getting into the season where viruses get passed. So it seems like a logical choice to extend it out for a few months.
Is that okay with everyone else if we said till the end of the year and then revisit come January?
Yes.
I can make a motion to that effect.
Sure. Carlene's making a motion that we stay virtual until the end of the year and then revisit virtual versus in person. Does that sound good? Is that your motion, Carlene? Now that I just said it for you.
Thanks, Jenny.
I'll second that motion, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie. All in favor, say aye.
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 Awesome, thank you.
I'm sorry, you wanted to say something more.
Nope, I'm good. Next things are our next meeting. We are going to request September 20th with the joint village hall meeting. So hopefully we'll be able to have enough people to have a quorum there. If you want to put that on your calendar, and Jennifer can confirm as from talking with the village. And then after that, our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 13th. Are there any other requests for meetings that we need to plan for? Or future agenda items that we need to add? Okay. Then I guess I would appreciate a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Awesome. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hey, a quick question before we all leave.
Kyle
Sorry.
opposed. Yeah.
If we're meeting with the village on the 20th, is that in person or do we have?
The village meetings are in person, unless they were to change that next week when they meet next week. So I would plan in person. They do have plexiglass stations between seats at the table. And so there's ways to spread out and try to remain safe. Masks are also required in the village hall. They do not have a hybrid option right now. So you would have to be in person to be able to participate. If for some reason you didn't feel safe with that, as long as we had a quorum, you can watch those live on OCA Media, but then you would not be able to participate in any joint conversation.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Awesome. Thank you guys for your time and your great conversation. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
You too.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.